Hello everyone, it's Molten. So, it's been a minute since I last uploaded to YouTube. I said it would be only a month or so, and it's now August. Gonna be honest, I'm garbage at keeping to a schedule. Between working 2 jobs and struggling to figure out video editing, YouTube is difficult for me. But I am back, now, with content I did not previously say I would be completing. I'll revisit my Warrior Cat series, I swear. Fairy Tail is a manga in anime, a series that heavily inspired me in my youth. Before I slowly realized at 16 the author didn't want to be writing it anymore and was rushing to finish it while still adding in unnecessary content. Why wasn't Tartarus the final arc, instead of some random kingdom we've never heard of before? Guy who makes demons, and yet you don't make his most powerful creations the final enemy? By the time the manga ended, I was angry and over it. Last year, to give it another shot, I watched the anime adaptation. And while the anime added filler that I appreciated, and it definitely improved the overall story, I still maintain my previous opinions. For this video, there are things I need people to accept. Number 1, you need to be cool with criticism and large visual changes to characters. I'm not saying you need to share my opinion, but if you can't accept critiques of the things you love, I'm really not the creator to watch. Number 2, I don't completely hate Fairy Tail. I think the first 48 episodes are worth a watch and enjoy them as a contained series. There are several moments within this series as a whole that I still hold very dear that give me chills when I think about them. But overall, I do have a lot to say. Number 3, I'm not saying Mishima is untalented or that you're wrong for liking his content. Everyone has personal preferences. With that said, let's get into the it girl herself. Lucy is such a frustrating character. On one hand, she's one of the few main female shonen characters we get. On the other, she suffers constant sexual humiliation like every woman in the series and is constantly sidelined for Natsu content. And that's without getting into how in any other manga, a dead parent passing on their power to their child who looks like a carbon copy of them would have been a huge focal plot point with intense relevance. But no. Igmil and Natsu get everything, and let's throw in random, unnecessary birth parents for Urza and Gray, too. Not like bond over blood was a major part of the series. I could rant for hours, but you all came here for art, so let's talk lore and then design. Lucy grew up part of the wealthy noble class. Her mother raised her on stories of the guild wizards and heroes. Layla was an intensely talented mage, somehow able to collect 4 golden keys over her lifetime. Only into her 30s she'd accomplished the impossible. And yet, these mythic spirits were treated like family. They helped raise Lucy. Lucy adored them. Jude was never big on them. He'd expected Layla to retire after marriage, but she still found time and reason to make magic-related trips. She'd never say why, but Lucy and Jude were never welcome. On each trip, she'd carefully choose spirits to bring. For her last one, she brought Capricorn and Pixis. She wouldn't make it back. Capricorn was nowhere to be found upon the discovery of her body. Pixis was. Reports said that she depleted her mana and couldn't protect herself. Jude wanted the spirits gone. Lucy fought to keep several of them. A good portion of the silver keys got claimed. The golden keys were rare enough that Jude allowed it. For Lucy, every spirit mattered. She kept a list. Lucy wallowed in the absence of Layla. She built her magic, summoning spirits, exhausting herself to have her family. Aquarius, standing as a stern, reluctant mother, her adoration for Lucy masked. Taurus, as an older brother who simply wanted his sister to smile. cancer, as a father who could help her learn manners and hygiene. Jude took a step back. He was never truly affectionate, but Lucy was far too much of Layla for him to be around her at all. Their interactions were limited to business ventures. Plans worked out for Lucy to marry the son of a church paladin. But at 16, Lucy made up her mind. Ran away from home, set on finding the keys she'd missed, set on joining the Guild of All Guilds. Over her journey through the story, we'll see as she comes to reckon with any anger she feels at living in the shadow of Layla, because everywhere she goes, people know who her mother is. She looks far too much like her for anyone not to realize it. Lucy in my rewrite initially dresses very conservatively. She's young and has been raised to be modest. Over the series, we see her grow and gain confidence. She's tall and lanky to start, but builds muscle as she fights. Learning to use the whip, her upbringing means that she knows fencing. Her clothing is very much taken from early 2000s looks. Mishima started that way before shifting into much more well-known fairy tale styles. I personally really like Y2K It Girl Lucy, and I enjoy this concept too much for me to back away from it. I do think I'll incorporate other looks of hers eventually, but for now, I really like this style on her. I hope that you guys like how she turns out, because I think she's very dear to me personally. I feel like a big question that might be asked as you guys are watching the video is who I really ship Lucy with if I intend to do any romance, because I do want to do some romance rewrites conceptually in my version of Fairy Tale. But for Lucy, I like the idea of exploring a non-romantic storyline with her, so she doesn't romance anyone, not that she can't later, but for the current story she doesn't. I think platonic relationships and her grief over Layla and everything like that is incredibly compelling on its own, and romance isn't exactly necessary. I intend to do a video on her spirits down the line, but for now I do hope you enjoy the glimpses I have. I'd like Natsu far more if every other character in the show wasn't at some point nerfed or otherwise ignored to make him important. I like a good traditional shonen protagonist as much as anyone. I'm a day one Korra defender, avid Luffy lover, loud Asta supporter, etc, etc. But Natsu, to quote Peter Griffin, insists upon himself. So, what are my lore notes on Natsu? Natsu was with Dragneel as early as he could remember. When he was 7, someone took him away. He fell asleep, waking up in a strange, new world. He wandered for a time before a beautiful woman found him. She brought him to Fairy Tale. The two of them spoke long with Makarov. Natsu's last memory of the woman was her hugging him tightly, telling him she'd be back. He didn't remember her name. She never did return. Makao was the one to step up and adopt Natsu, raising him as a son with the help of his at the time wife, Eno. A few years down the line, the egg for Happy was discovered, another addition to the family and an old friend for Natsu. A year after Happy's introduction, Romeo was born. Natsu was so excited to have another little brother, and Romeo idolized Natsu, leading to them often getting into trouble and Romeo getting hurt. Eno was always a little frustrated, but she never hated Natsu. She struggled to handle his more chaotic tendencies, however, and ultimately disagreements between her and Makao led to a divorce. Eventually, Natsu at 16 asked to move into his own home. One notable thing about their first meeting is that something about Lucy strikes recognition for Natsu. A familiar smell, the ghost of someone he once knew but can't place. And it will be a little while before the dots properly connect for him. Natsu and Happy moved out a little over a year before the trip that led them to meeting Lucy. A lot of what I could have said about Natsu and changing his story would involve me getting into details on plot changes, which I think could be videos of their own. Unlike with Lucy, Natsu's wardrobe would change very sparingly. Only following the defeat of notable antagonists do we get a costume update. arc beginnings, if you will. I personally am a big fan of tan short Natsu. He's stout and a bit more hardy than some of the other dragon slayers we meet. Though he's small, still he has a speed to him. He gets into trouble a bit too often due to his habit of ignoring authority to do what he wants. I do actually really like Natsu's canon outfit, so I didn't want to change too much about him in that department, though I did want to add my own twist. I think Natsu doesn't really care much for most clothes, that if he was allowed, he'd run around completely naked since a lot of the fabric isn't fire resistant enough to blast his magic. He gets clothes, wears them until they fully deteriorate, and then changes his outfit. The shirt in this image is one that started as a long sleeve. The shirt is closed since I think it makes sense for him to wear something that wouldn't be flapping around constantly while he's fighting. I also did include Happy with Natsu, largely because I don't currently have plans to change the Exceed storyline, and so I could also mention each Exceed is based on an actual cat type. Happy is a British Shorthair. I think Natsu is where we really start to get into character designs that I think are going to be pretty divisive among the fans of fairy tales, since while they keep elements of the character, they do visually change things enough for some people to have some pushback in response to them. If you aren't personally a fan of my interpretation of Natsu, that's completely fine. You are welcome to your opinions. I know a lot of people like his canon design as is. I think it's a good design. I just wanted to try my own. Gray is a good example of an interesting character whose story gets bogged down by author desire to add things fans would enjoy. I really am not a fan of canon Groovia and get pretty upset at what I feel was writing that held back the characters from their full story potential. In my rewrite, I don't intend for Groovia to be canon. In fact, most of Team Natsu simply have no romantic arcs, since all of them are focusing on platonic bonds and internal struggles, and to me this is just far more interesting. What lore I do have is this. Gray lost his family to Deliora. Demons showing up and wreaking havoc is nothing new in the world, but Deliora truly came out of nowhere and seemed unstoppable. Following the destruction of his town, Gray was found by a woman named and her adopted son, Leon. As luck would have it, Leon and Gray would be almost the same age, though that tiny age gap allowed for Leon to be pretty upset at the revelation he was younger. Was an odd woman. She wasn't especially maternal or kind to them, but she provided, taught them how to survive. Her training methods were brutal, but she made it incredibly clear everything she did was to make sure they'd live. They were kids, but she didn't feel the need to shield them from the reality of the world. In spite of how she talked and acted, Gray could tell she was scared. Always on edge, always listening to the radio she carried around, telling the boys to periodically pack up so they could move. It was a few months in when Gray realized she was tracking Deliora, not to face it, but to flee. The creature was always edging closer, almost as if it was giving chase. For 3 years, this is how they lived, surviving, not thriving. There's only so much you can entertain impatient children before they move beyond your orders. Gray was well known for his disobedience. He stayed up long after had fallen asleep, listened to the radio so that he could race to the beast, believing that at 11 he knew how to handle things. Showing up is the only reason he survived, and it was perhaps due to Gray's actions that she finally broke down, admitted that she was the reason Deliora was there. A few years before she met Gray and Leon, she had a research partner, both of them vying for power and hidden magics. They'd come across some of Zareth's manuscripts, and from that summoned the creature. Her partner was taken out during the initial casting, and ever since then, it's been chasing her. In that moment, something changed, and she told her boys to stay safe, and set out to contain the creature until hopefully it could be destroyed properly. Gray had known about Ice Shell from Ur's notes, but seeing it was different. When Fairy Tale Guild wizards arrived the next morning, they found one child and a pair of footprints leading into the woods. Gray was taken in by Vigitir. He was already watching out for another kid, Kana, who was incredibly similar to Gray in disposition. She was older, and the hope was maybe she could connect with him and it would make things better for them both. She did connect with him, but instead of being a good role model, she taught him how to steal, how to snatch a few cigarettes and some liquor when adults weren't looking, how to gamble and where to stash things you didn't want anyone to know about. She was also part of the group Gray used to go on missions with when they still needed a chaperone. However, Kana wasn't sentimental. At 18, she moved out and largely stopped interacting with Gray. He chased after her for a while, but after many rejections, eventually became more reclusive and distant again. He runs a good amount of solo missions as he's hit 18 and is old enough to do what he wants. Recently, that what he wants has been tracking down Urza, trying to figure out where she went since she's been missing for longer than usual. Gray has bad habits. He's young, and to those who are older than him, he's a teenager who's far too serious for his own good, who can be a bit silly at times. To those his own age and younger, he's the cool guy those of the guild want to get to know, or aspire to be. Once again, I didn't want to change too much about Gray, but I did want to slim him down a bit. He's a distance fighter, so him being jacked feels a bit strange. I opted to make him almost androgynous in his beauty. For anyone wondering, well, why would he smoke? He has canonically smoked in early canon of the manga, and I think it's interesting to keep that in about him. He's the oldest of the original trio at first until Urza appears. Initially, I made him more stylish and fitted in my early designs of him, but I've since opted to lean further into his canon outfits. Once again, I pulled from early 2000s male fashion. Gray isn't stylish in an intentional way, he just throws on clothes that fit him, and he is a conventionally attractive guy. For his Tenro fit, I looked once again to kind of stick close to canon, but also dig more into like early 2000s fashion. I put my own twist on it and added a bit of flair. I was incredibly tempted to give him a buzz cut. I saw so many images of guys with buzz cuts in the early 2000s, and I figured Gray wouldn't really be the type to care. If he was hot on an island, he'd shave his head if he wanted to, but ultimately I took pity on you Gray fans who likely would not want to see that, so he has hair and instead I just slapped down a bandana. I do hope you like how he turned out. I personally really enjoyed the current visual I have for him. Here's the Ice Wizard himself. This was going to be the point when I started to talk about Urza and eventually molded into Wendy because I was planning to do Team Natsu as a whole. However, midway through getting the Wendy and Urza designs done, I started heavily thinking about the lore of the story and character dynamics and started really wanting to do some designs for other characters. I have finished Urza and Wendy's pages. I have recorded them. I have posted them online if you really want to see what they look like. But I think I'm going to actually save lore deep dives with them until I get to them chronologically in my rewrite, because I guess now I'm going to be doing an actual chronological lore video. So, without further ado, let's get into the first redesign that will be important for this story. An overarching character trait Mishima gives to all of his older men that I hate is the way in which they lust after all the women they know, including those they've watched or are currently watching grow up. Now, if this was a blood family situation, I could unfortunately buy the idea of a creepy uncle the family just tells you to not engage with to keep the peace when all it's going to do is allow their actions to go on unquestioned. However, In found family situations where our core father figure adamantly tells us everyone in the guild is his child, I don't think it's crazy to want a little more of a feeling like the adults in charge actually care about those around them. Let's talk Makau and the Conbolts. Makau doesn't come from a family of wizards. He didn't have a particularly strong affinity for magic. Even still, within the city of Magnolia, it was hard to find anyone who wasn't itching to join fairy tale from a young age. His parents tried to encourage him towards other pursuits. It was a renowned merchant city after all. Thriving as a guild mage was rare, and the turnover rate at fairy tale was relatively large. People get lost in the shuffle often and decide the life isn't for them. But Makau was set. That didn't stop him from getting into trouble in his youth. He was a punk, he had sticky fingers. The first magic item he ever got was stolen with the help of his longtime friend Wakaba, and a few other kids their age. Despite his knack for delinquency, he still attended school. The Fairy Tale Guild wouldn't let kids join without parental approval, and all that free time and little to do, Makau grew easily bored. In his school days, he met and clashed heads with Enno. As years passed, he matured. Once he hit 18 and was old enough to join the guild of his own volition, he started going on missions. He straightened up surprisingly fast. The dangers guild wizards faced and the skills they needed to survive, it was a brutal reality check. The way people would be forced to give up on the life due to disillusionment or, worst yet, injury, sometimes to a fatal degree. As he would become more serious, his relationship with Enno improved, beginning a slow-burning friendship turned romance. Their marriage was no surprise, though they struggled to have a kid. Enno took up working at a local museum. About 8 years into their marriage, at 32, they adopted Natsu. Enno wasn't prepared for a naturally gifted magic kid, and cracks became clear in their marriage very soon after. It was following adopting Natsu that Makau took steps back from more dangerous missions, leaning further into chaperoning teens and kids who wanted to go on missions. Natsu got his first taste of being a guild wizard very early into his stay with the guild. He was so clearly made for the life in a way that Makau was almost in awe of. When Happy was added and Natsu had a true friend to focus his time on, things became easier, but very quickly got worse again when Romeo was born. Enno worried constantly about Romeo's safety around Natsu, while Makau fought to say Natsu wasn't a danger, words that were hard to believe when things he did actively caused Romeo to get hurt. Ultimately, the cracks in their relationship became so drastic that it wouldn't be salvageable. Divorce happened, Romeo's upset, Happy is devastated, Natsu seems to be a bit confused, but he and Enno never really talked, so her absence doesn't affect him as much. Romeo stays with his mother exclusively while Makau visits with him until Natsu moves out, at which point Romeo begins to spend half his time between each of them. In spite of their flaws, Enno and Makau stay amicable. It's clear there are still so many feelings between them, and when Makau gets hurt, Enno is there to fuss and make sure he's actually taking steps to get better. When Enno was promoted to museum curator or has big events, Makau somehow always manages to be in the neighborhood with some sort of simple yet thoughtful gift. Romeo loves his parents. They refuse to try and pit him against each other. Not a perfect family, but one that cares nonetheless. Enno might not get Natsu, but she still does love when Happy swings by for a visit. For Makau, I wanted to lean more into outfits that were clearly thrown on, not something meant to make him look cool, but something you could believably see a man in his 40s wearing on a daily basis. I gave him a softer body, and overall just did my best to make him look and feel much more like a trusted adult you could see chaperoning a group of kids on a mission. The type of man you're not afraid of per se, but dread having to ask for help on your mistakes, because you know he'll give you the most disappointed and tired look you've ever seen in your life. He'll still help you though. For Romeo, I opted to stick with the idea of making sure he looked like a little kid, but I wanted to weave in elements of him already trying to copy Natsu in the way that he dresses, intentionally ripping off sleeves when Enno isn't there to stop him. His clothes aren't meant to be super over the top since I wanted them to be things you could see a 6-year-old putting on himself. With Enno's wardrobe, I wanted her to feel refined and professional. She's running a museum and has pride in her work. She's not exactly the person you could see marrying a wizard from a guild like Fairy Tail, yet in spite of how she carries herself around those who don't know her, she's at her core a very caring and kind person. I know the things I wrote for her may lead people to think that she's the problem, but I want her and Makiao's marriage to feel like a mutual failing, both of them struggling, a tense dynamic where there's negativity but still so many good things. My last note, I may have finished up my Enno content for now, but don't think she won't pop up. I do have plans for her going forward into the future. I'm not someone who thinks every side character in a piece of media needs to be fully realized, but in a series like Fairy Tail, where we have a guild setting and everyone is meant to be family and have some love or care for each other, I think it's weird and mean-spirited to just have certain of those reoccurring ones be punching bags who only exist for those jokes. I have actually put a lot of thought into the largely forgotten Fairy Tail guildmates, and do plan to find time to redesign all of the named ones we have, and update some of my designs from last year. I think the extended guild cast would have been great for world building if done correctly. It's pretty clear Nab was meant to be inspired by indigenous people, but as is often the case in anime, the design in question was not well handled. I'm not a person to speak on this in depth, but I can at least give my own take on how I'd write Nab. Nab, like Makiao, wasn't raised in Fairy Tail. His family were magically gifted, though they didn't focus their talents on something organized like a guild, opting instead to work as vets or other animal-related professions. It was some of Nab's friends who encouraged him to join the guild, those he'd known since childhood. The group excitedly made plans, and when they hit 18, they took off for Fairy Tail, making the long trip to the city of Magnolia. This group of friends were ultimately the ones Nab formed a team with, excited to do some good, try new things. Fairy Tail was loud and crowded, so much more chaotic than anywhere they'd gone before. The city itself was much more massive and bustling than Nab's homeland. It was an adjustment period, and several times Nab contemplated returning back to where he came from. His friends always convinced him to stay. He was notably skilled, though rarely used the full extent of his magic, since it often included taking away agency from living creatures, and he simply was never fine with doing that. His powers allowed him to both communicate and control various animals. Usually he chose to simply communicate requests, and his ability to convince those around him assisted him so that it would be much easier to do. At 27, he was approved to take the S-Class exam, and to the surprise of most, came out on top, claiming the S-Class title. Even if he didn't have a vested interest in taking on missions that were more dangerous, he still was willing to accompany other groups who were. A year down the line, a mission wiped out his original team, leaving him the sole survivor. Those he'd truly bonded with were gone so fast. For the first time in a decade, he returned home, set on bringing their bodies to be properly buried. He was going to stay, let it all go, but his mother and father convinced him not to, told him good things waited. He wasn't one to tell his parents no. Returning didn't stop the guilt he felt over the deaths his mind kept telling him he could have prevented. So he dealt with it in the only way he knew how. He hid. Rarely left the guild, sparingly went on quests with other groups, eventually choosing to largely retire and focus on being a guild chaperone for younger members in need of an adult guardian for their quests. So many guild wizards look for glory, at this point he was looking for purpose. For Nab, I wanted to take more care in trying to portray him visually and plot-wise in a way that might give him quirks, but lets him still be a person. I wanted to keep some elements of his original design while removing parts I felt didn't fit or add things that I thought maybe would enhance what was there already. I was very tempted to perhaps look into giving him some tamoko around his cheeks and maybe his nose to call back to the white markings on his canon design, but as I'm aware, tamoko has a special meaning and are culturally important. I didn't want to just slap something on him without doing proper research, so for now, we're going to leave off with what I have. I do hope everyone likes the designs I made as much as I do. I have a strong love for my design of Nab. With our characters listed, let's get into exactly what changes I'd make to the early portions of Fairy Tail up through Eisenwald. The start of Fairy Tail is largely the same with notable change to how Lucy acts. Lucy, rather than attempting to flirt, tries to barter and eventually resorts to begging cutely to get what she wants. While a little pathetic, people still find her attempts endearing enough. Natsu is moving through towns trying to find a trail for Igneel, completing simple missions along the way for money to fund his journey when he runs into Lucy. The important thing about this arc is that following Lucy being saved by Natsu from Bora, we get a slight reveal from the guards who came to save the people. Them being marked by what appears to be a very old symbol for the cult of Zareth, something that will become important later. It is on the journey back to the guild, after Natsu agrees to get Lucy into Fairy Tail, that they happen upon one of the jobs Natsu had pulled a flyer for pertaining to a quest involving Duke Everlew. It is notable that Natsu hasn't exactly told Lucy his age at this point, but that he's young enough for people to be doubtful of his capabilities. They struggle, but still manage to complete the quest, leading to Lucy receiving the Virgo key and one other silver one. This is the first golden key Lucy has ever gotten for herself. Up until this point, every single spirit was an heirloom from her mother. With Everlew defeated, Natsu and Lucy finally make it to the Fairy Tail Guild, and the chaos that you'd expect. As well as a good heaping of chastising, because Natsu decided he'd intentionally go out on quests without the approval of an adult or a proper chaperone to make sure he didn't get himself killed. He told no one where he was going, and is supposed to be put on probation. However, upon returning home, he and Happy are met by their adopted brother, Romeo. With Natsu and Happy MIA and no indication of where they'd gone, Makao took it upon himself to try and find his sons. Makao, far more responsible, did inform the guild where he was headed. He'd gotten some bad tips that angled him towards the mountains. It's been about a week since then. The guild would have been more concerned and sent someone out already. However, Natsu had been gone for 2 weeks by this time, and a good portion of the guild simply believed that Natsu was so far ahead there was no reason to be concerned. For the children of Makao, knowing he hasn't checked in yet does not bode well, so in spite of their already negative standing in the guild, Natsu and Happy rush out to find him. Lucy, tagging along not only because they're her only two friends in the guild at this point, but also because she knows the fear of losing a parent and the emotion Natsu still has tied to Igneel, who he's been searching for. It takes time, but eventually they track down the location of Makao. At the moment, he's cursed, monstrous. All they can do is incapacitate him to get him back to his original form, returning him to the guild where wizards much more familiar and well-versed in undoing curse magic can help. While Natsu, Happy, and Lucy do get an earful for disobeying orders, there is an appreciation for them helping save Makao. However, it is made clear under no uncertain terms that they should go out on a mission without a chaperone again unless they want to be utterly incapable of stepping foot further than 200 feet from the guild hall. This brings us to what I consider to be our first proper story arc with a notable antagonist, Eisenwald. I mentioned before that I intended for Urza not to appear before the Tower of Heaven. Now, for all of you out there, you might be wondering, well, who takes over during the Eisenwald arc in her absence? And that, my dear watchers, is why Nab was included in this video. Makao would have been the first choice, due to him being Natsu's dad and aware of how to handle him on missions, but since he's still recovering from his previous mission, Nab was sent in his place. Gray would also be sent along with the group since he'd be currently without a group and constantly trying to set out alone to figure out where Urza was. The goal with him was mainly to just keep him distracted. The mission wasn't originally to take down Eisenwald, it was more of a simple monster hunting mission, a creature causing problems in a small town a while away. However, on their travels, the group would unexpectedly get wrapped up in the conflict. Nab is a responsible adult, but he is also not used to traveling with Natsu and thus forgets him on the train. I still think the canon lead-in of Natsu being the one to interact with Eisenwald first works, and it's an incredibly funny series of events. Of course, this is when we see Gray in action for the first time, and it's also when we see an S-Class wizard taking charge in an unexpected way. Nab showing us why he has the title, and what a small drop of his magic can accomplish when plans line up. With Virgo making her first true appearance to help the gang tunnel out of their trap, we are introduced to how magic levels and relationship bonds can affect spirits' magics. With Everlou, Virgo was very easily able to burrow and appear, Everlou valuing Virgo and having a higher level of magic than you'd anticipate. With Lucy, she's still growing as a wizard, still completely unsure of who Virgo is. They can burrow out, but it takes a bit of time. I'd keep the conclusion of Eisenwald the same because I still think it's hilarious what ends up happening. Menacing deadly force being defeated by some stupid way was really one of the first things to make me fall in love with Fairy Tail, and I still hold it dear to me. The kids thinking they're facing a world-ending threat only for them to be saved by dumb design is amazing. It helps set up the idea of how scary the creations of Xerath can be while also giving us some reprieve and reminding the viewers that at its core, Fairy Tail is silly. And that is the end of my current recap. Now, for the characters with brief glimpses and relatively unrefined designs, I haven't actually gone through the trouble of redesigning them. Maybe I will one day, but they are a bit more unimportant in terms of antagonists, and I tend not to have much desire to spend altering them. I did include glimpses of a few guild characters and celestial spirits for anyone curious. My intention with each arc is that beyond Team Natsu, we get a cycling cast from the guild to really let us see each of them shine, as well as some filler arcs in between for fun and world-building relationship growth. I also have a few ideas for plot arcs that wouldn't include Team Natsu if we ever get around to it, but that is for later. I think if I stay on track and do a second part, I'll keep cruising on with Galuna Island, meaning likely the Shadowgear trio will be my next redesigns, and a few largely forgotten Fairy Tail side characters. Maybe some of the antagonists for the arc too. Who knows? Honestly, this video took a lot longer to complete than I planned. I made the dumb decision to actually draw out plot lines at the end. That added another 2 weeks onto things. Couple it with me recording the voiceover and then making plot changes to fix things that were worded weird. I'm still struggling with editing things, but I'm glad that I was finally able to get this out for everyone. Let me know in the comments what you guys think. Are there characters you want to see? Thank you for watching. Feel free to subscribe if you want to stick around. Until next time.